Hello everyone, this is Pastor Dirk, and we're here for another day of reflection upon the commands of Christ. Again, we are doing this as part of our series called True Love, Fact and Fiction. We're looking at the commands of Christ because we believe that in those commands, Jesus is teaching us how to raise our love game to another level, how we can truly reflect God's love that changes us and through us helps change the world. In order to reflect on these commands, we've been focusing on the commands given during his Sermon on the Mount. It is this group of teachings that he delivered outside of Capernaum to his first disciples there on the hillside. And essentially, he's letting us know what the agenda of his kingdom is. He's going to build upon the laws that the people of God already have and take them to another level. Yesterday, we looked at laws pertaining to adultery and, as a consequence, lust. Throughout this narrative, or throughout these commands, Jesus is actually pushing us back from the external problem to the heart problem. What we see in murder, for example, and adultery is the external problem. It's the result of something that goes wrong in the heart. And if we're going to take our love game to another level, we have to go to the heart of the issue. So today we want to continue those reflections. We stay on this subject of sexual infidelity and the command Jesus has about that. And now he brings the topic of divorce into consideration. Look what he says in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 31. Jesus says, "It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce." Here he's taking us back primarily to Deuteronomy chapter 24 and other sections, but mostly there. There is a provision for men in this case to give their wives certificates of divorce. If they find something in them that they don't agree with or they can't tolerate or is indecent in some way, they can give these women certificates of divorce. There's a lot of debate about what those certificates are. One possible interpretation, and the one that I kind of align with, is in a culture where men are in control and they can conduct these divorces. The whole point of the certificate, I think, is to protect the woman. The idea is that she'll now have this certificate, and as she is now in culture, she is now free to engage in other relationships. In other words, she hasn't left the marriage, she hasn't done something unfaithful, she's been released by her husband, so now she has a piece of paper, as it were, that allows her to go forward. It's a protection for the women. That's my interpretation of this certificate. But Jesus says this whole process now has been abused. Look at how he places it. In his words, he says, "But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her a victim of adultery." Jesus is again going from the outward problem to the inward problem of the heart. By the time Jesus is talking, there's a debate about divorce and what are the legitimate reasons for divorce in the Jewish community of that day. We see this debate continuing in Matthew chapter 19. There's a more extensive debate, and there the religious leaders ask a very explicit question: can you divorce for any and all reasons? The situation was that men, and here again we're in a culture where men dominated things, men were kind of using this as an out. They were writing certificates of divorce anytime they wanted to change wives. I guess similar to the way they would change clothes or change houses or change cars, or change, I guess not cars in those days, but change belongings. They just simply got rid of one and got a new one, and they were issuing these pieces of paper like they were printing money. Jesus is saying this is definitely not what God intended. This is not the point and the purpose of divorce. In fact, in the Matthew 19 passage, if you take some time to read that, you'll see that he goes back to the Genesis 2 provision, that the whole point of God in joining a man and woman together is that they should be one flesh. And this can mean many things on many levels, but at least one thing it means is that You're not supposed to share your bodies with other bodies. In other words, when these two people commit one to another, their bodies belong to each other. That should be the safe place to have sexual relationships. Because in a sexual relationship, you're not just joining two bodies together, you're joining two people together. Their feelings, their emotions, their needs. The sexual relationship is supposed to take context in a lifelong commitment of love. That's really the point of the Genesis provision. So later on in culture, where people decide they don't like that, they want to exchange partners and sleep with whoever they want, and they think a technicality like divorce allows them to do that, Jesus is bringing them back to a starting place and saying, no, that's not the point. Now, unfortunately, these conversations about divorce have really gotten out of hand. I think even among Bible-believing Christians, I feel like they've missed the point. I've been in churches where people are looked down upon because they're divorced. They're told they're not allowed to get remarried because they're divorced. They're told they can't hold leadership positions because they're divorced. And I think all of that very definitely misses the point. It misses the point of what Jesus is saying here. It misses it entirely. Because Jesus is not talking about a legal answer here, that the legal position or the legal situation of divorce is the problem. No, that's not the issue at all. He's talking about the fact that when we cheat on our spouse, we create victims. It's an attitude of the heart that basically says, I don't want to keep the promise I made, now I'll cheat, and we create victims out of that. I've been in many conversations with people who have been victims of adultery. Whenever there's a cheating situation, children are hurt, families are hurt, relatives are hurt, communities are hurt, friends are hurt. People have to choose sides. I don't think it takes very much to convince most of us that there are victims in adultery. And Jesus does then make this other statement. He says, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Well, taken on the surface, this is very controversial. I mean, this is what makes people feel bad about being divorced, and people take that and use that as a stigma against divorced people. But that's not really what Jesus is saying here. He's discussing this in a context of unfaithfulness. And what he's saying is divorce is not a substitute for faithfulness. If we don't want to be faithful, we can't just use divorce as a way of getting out and wiggling out of our original commitment. Now, divorce is important. It is necessary. It is a part of the Mosaic law. Jesus understands that. Divorce is necessary, but it's always painful. I mean, sometimes we can't continue in the relationship. The promises we made, things have changed, people have lied to us, and divorce is a necessary way to minimize damage, to stop hurting one another, to stop hurting children, to stop hurting other people. Sometimes it is the right answer, and people should not be looked down upon for taking that action. But there is another dimension to divorce, and I think anybody who's been involved in divorce understands that it's a painful option. It creates a lot of problems that must be solved. Financial problems, relationship problems, children problems. These things have to be solved. And all Jesus is doing is, before we kind of give up on our commitment to one another in a marriage relationship, we should think this through. We should not just abandon our commitments because we want to go have sex with someone else. Divorce is not an excuse for that. You know, if you look at contemporary statistics, and they're kind of all over the map. I've seen statistics that estimate 13 to 20% of people cheat in their marriage, all the way up to 60 or 70%. I'm not sure what the real number is. But many divorces are, at least 40% of the divorces are because someone in the relationship cheated. Jesus is addressing this issue. The hard issue here is a matter of commitment, and the matter of a commitment to a whole person. The fact that we want to exchange our bodies with other bodies does not permit us to give up on our commitment one to another. When we make that commitment, when we join with someone else in a marital command, we are to remain faithful to that person until death till death parts us, as we say at our marriage ceremonies. It's a very important commitment. And when we take our love to that level, we build healthier families. I believe one of the main reasons God brought monogamy into our culture is so that when children are created in a sexual union, they're raised in a safe place, in a place where the partners love one another and care for one another and are demonstrating love to the children. It's meant to be a strong family bond. That was God's ideal. Now I realize in the world our families are broken and people get divided, and the biological parents are not always the best parents, and I know that that's a reality. But if we go back to the beginning and we ask, what was God's intention? What was for a man and a woman to, when they produce a child biologically, they stay together and commit to one another so that they can build strong children and strong families. That was his ideal. And Jesus now is calling us back to that ideal, to love our husbands, to love our wives with an exclusive kind of love that does not consider other people as sexual partners. Again, we're back to the heart of the matter. Are we willing to live out the love that God gives to us, to live out the light that he puts into our lives? That will take our love game to another level, and our family life to another level. So let's listen to Christ's commands. And come back one more time. We have one more lesson here in commands from the Sermon on the Mount. We'll address that. It has to do with truth telling and the value